Hello, and welcome to I Know Dino, the Big Dinosaur Podcast, where we cover news, interviews, and discussions of all things dinosaur.
Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today's podcast is brought to you by TRX Dinosaurs. They have innovative puppets, posable sculptures, and dinosaur animatronics. And you can find out more and order your own at trxdinosaurs.com. This week we have Dinosaur of the Day, Alectrosaurus, and a bunch of dinosaur news. But before we get into our news, we want to thank some of our patrons who helped make this episode possible. And this week we would like to thank Scotty, Megan Dixon, Kessler, Tristan Jules, Grandpa Dino, Rhinosaurus, Morgan Eklove, Dr. Eigenbot, Taylor, Lori, and Risa. And Risa just joined, so thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. We have a treat for all of our patrons since we're coming up on our 200th episode in just a couple short weeks.
Yeah, everybody who is a patron, when our 200th episode comes out, will get the top 10 dinosaurs of 2014 audiobook, which I realize 2014 was a while ago, but...
But it's an audiobook.
Yeah, we just finally made the audiobook version, and we'll be making the audiobook versions of the other books at some time in the future.
So you have from now until September 26th, that's when the 200th episode comes out, to become a patron, and we'll give you this audiobook.
Yep.
And you can join our Patreon by going to patreon.com/iknowdino.
Last week I mentioned that there were a couple of new dinosaurs that I hadn't talked about yet. So I have two more new dinosaurs to talk about this week, and there'll be even more next week, I'm sure. So the first one I'm going to talk about is an iguanodontian from Mongolia, which was described by Terry Gates and others. And this one's called Choyrodon, is how I'm going to pronounce it. You're really supposed to roll the R and make it sound all Mongolian-like, which I cannot do. So I'm just going to stick with Choyrodon. And the species name is barsboldi, so it's Choyrodon barsboldi. And Choyrodon is called this because it was found near Chur, Mongolia, which is about 200 kilometers southeast of the capital, Ulaanbaatar, and odon, which is Latin for tooth, which they say is a common ending for ornithopod dinosaur taxa, which I'm going to talk about more later, and sent me down a really deep rabbit hole. And this was only, 5 minutes into researching the first news item?
That sounds about right.
And barsboldi is the species name because they wanted to honor Dr. Rinchen Barsbold, who is a prominent Mongolian paleontologist who helped find the first fossils of Choyrodon. So that makes sense. And I think there's been other Barsbold named dinosaurs too.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. They actually found 3 individuals of Choyrodon. They're all very close in size, but they're also all subadult. So it's like they found a very specific age group, and they're all that age, but none of them are adults. It's kind of weird. The remains include a complete skull, other than the brain case, which is basically part of the skull, but it's very much inside. So if you look at the outside of it, it looks like you have the full skull. They also found a partial sternum, and they found the left femur and the right tibia, which is kind of weird. So it's like the upper part of the left leg and the lower part of the right leg. And then a little bit of the hips. So not too much, but it's cool that they found the full skull because that's often the most interesting part, especially with dinosaurs like iguanodonts, where their body is just kind of a generic herbivore body, and then the head is often has different stuff.
Yeah, otherwise you wouldn't be able to tell what kind of genus it is.
Yeah, I think you're right. Looking at it, it does look quite a bit like Iguanodon. Its skull kind of curves downward in the front. So the top of the skull, which is sort of where the nose is, droops down over the bottom of the mouth. So it kind of looks like it has a huge nose kind of sagging over the mouth. If you know what Iguanodon looks like, then you know what I'm talking about. And it also has a really large nasal fenestra. So that's that big opening that goes through this, from the left to the right side in the nose. So I would call it a nose opening, but that makes you think of where it breathes in. And this isn't necessarily where it breathes in. It could just be an extra gap in the skull to kind of lighten it up. Those are both common in later hadrosauroids, but a little unusual for earlier hadrosauroids. And this one's relatively early because we think it's from the early Cretaceous, about 100 to 110 million years ago. So that's interesting. And then the other features that they found were that by the eyes, it has more similar features to early hadrosauroids, for example. So it's a mixture of features like we almost always see. They said that the dentary, or where all the teeth are, has 21 tooth positions, but there are only 2 teeth per family, meaning with one socket, there's 2 teeth in there.
That's a lot of teeth.
Yeah, but some of them have more than that. So, that means there's at least 42 teeth. And I'm not sure if the dentary, that might only be the one part of it, like the bottom part versus the top part. Either way, though, it's much fewer teeth than some of the later hadrosaurids had, because some of them even broke 1,000 teeth. So still pretty small dental batteries, I guess you'd say.
Wonder if that hurt, breaking 1,000 teeth.
They didn't break them all. They had that fancied enamel, remember?
I know. Just having some fun.
Yeah. They didn't give a size estimate for Choyrodon, but the skull is roughly, and I just eyeballed this, about 0.5 meter long, which is about 1.5 feet long. And so that makes it maybe about half the size of an adult iguanodon, which is about 10 meters, so 5 meters-ish. It's a subadult. And all 3 of them were subadults in around that sort of size. They could have given a size range, though, because they found the femur, so they could have guessed at the weight. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't. But maybe since it's already growing, they figure maybe the femur isn't scaled for that exact size individual or something. I don't know. It was found in the same formation as another iguanodontian named Ultirhinus. So the obvious question then is, if these are subadults and Ultirhinus is in the same formation, is it a subadult of Ultirhinus? And the author said that Choyrodon is probably not a ontigomorph of Ultirhinus, which I think is kind of a funny word, but I guess ontigomorph means that, they don't think it's just a different age of that same animal, like has been proposed for Triceratops with Torvosaurus and Stygimoloch with Pachycephalosaurus and all those kinds of things. In fact, when I Googled ontigomorph, just because I wanted to make sure, the first thing that pops up is the Wikipedia article for Stygimoloch because of Jack Horner.
Oh, yep. Makes sense.
Maybe he coined that word, I'm not sure. So they also tried making a few changes to their Choyrodon model to see if, when they did their phylogenetic analysis, it might come out as an ontigomorph, or, basically show that it's very similar to Ultirhinus. But when they did things like shrink the nasal fenestra a little bit in case that happened as it grew, they found that there were still enough differences between Ultirhinus and Choyrodon to consider them different animals. So they kind of hedged it by saying, we can't say definitively that they're different animals because we don't really know the age of Ultirhinus as well. If you knew it was an adult and it was bigger, or it was an adult in the same size, that would obviously give you better information, but they didn't include that as part of their analysis. So that would obviously be a good follow-up study. And if they do that study and find that, there are more similarities, then they might get lumped together again later. So that's our first new dinosaur of the podcast. But as promised...
The episode.
Yeah, good point.
There's been many new dinosaurs.
Yeah, we've literally had hundreds. But yeah, as promised, we have another new dinosaur this episode. And this one is a sauropod.
Yes.
Yeah, that was like a pause for applause sort of moment. It was described by Rodolfo Coria and others, and its name is Pilmatueia faundezi, and Pilmatueia is the name of the genus because it's from the Pilmatueia area of Argentina, which is in Patagonia. It's interesting to me, like a lot of times they'll describe it as Patagonia randomly and not mention Argentina at all. And then in this case, they didn't mention Patagonia. They just talk about Argentina the whole time.
You only need to know one piece of it.
I guess so. It's weird. I don't know. Maybe since they weren't going to name it Patagotitan or some other kind of Patagonian name, they just stuck with Argentina. And then faundezi is because it was named after Mr. Ramon Faundez, who they say is the manager of the Museo Municipal de las Lajas for supporting their project since 2009. And I couldn't find this museum anywhere. I found a similar museum, but it was in Cuba and doesn't seem to have anything to do with paleontology. So maybe it's just a philanthropist in Cuba who gave them money? I don't know. It's kind of interesting. If anybody knows what this museum is, tell me, and then I can add to our map. As always, they had to find some sort of unique thing about the dinosaur. So in this case, they call it the earliest recorded Cretaceous dicraeosaurid. And
All right.
yeah, so Dicraeosauridae is a family of diplodocoids, and it includes Amargasaurus, which is a pretty popular one, the one with the bifurcated spines down its neck that looks really cool. It's like a sail on a sauropod, or two sails, really. But the weird thing about it is there are several other Dicraeosaurids that are from the Jurassic, which is from before the Cretaceous. So calling it the earliest recorded Cretaceous Dicraeosaurid is kind of like describing your friend as like the youngest friend you have in their 30s. It's like you still have younger friends that are in their 20s, but you're going to specify like a very specific time range and then call them the youngest of that time range.
Well, it's nice to be able to have some claim to fame.
It's not really, I mean, if it's the earliest, but it's the earliest of a later period, seems kind of ridiculous to me. But I don't know, I guess it's interesting.
No, this happens a lot because there's such a big time difference between Cretaceous and Jurassic.
Yeah,
it's
that's
worth noting.
true. Yeah, and it still isn't that early in the Cretaceous, I suppose. But I don't know. It's sometimes having to make it the absolute most of something for every dinosaur discovery is kind of like, You could just say it's a new Dicraeosaurid from the Cretaceous in Argentina. That's interesting too.
I think you're being nitpicky.
Maybe. I think it might be an element of sort of how these publications happen, though, because a lot of journals only want to publish things if there's some like significant relevance to that individual. So if the more things that they can say is like the most or the biggest or the earliest or the latest, then that gets them more likely to be published in a better journal. So that's probably why they do it. So a lot of these Dicraeosaurids have really interesting vertebrae like Amargasaurus. And that is basically all they found with Pilmatueia, and it looks a lot like Amargasaurus, really. So its spines are taller than the rest of the vertebrae combined, which is pretty crazy looking. So you've got that little kind of central part of the vertebrae, and then the, pieces that stick off to the sides, and then really tall spines sticking out of the top. So it looks really cool. And because of that, there are just a lot of general similarities assumed between it and Amargasaurus, which is also from Argentina and from the Cretaceous. That's the latest known Dicraeosaurid, and previously it was the only one known from the Cretaceous. So since this one was a little bit earlier, that makes it the earliest one known in the Cretaceous. Unfortunately, since they only found a couple bones, they didn't learn too much more about the family, other than just have some things to compare with this individual versus other ones in the same family.
Just happy they found another sauropod.
Yeah, it's cool. They're one of my favorite groups of dinosaurs, too, with those tall spines. It's such an interesting combination.
Mm-hmm.
And most people have no idea that they exist. Sauropods with sails on their necks. It's pretty nuts.
We have some sad news next. There was a recent fire at the National Museum of Brazil in Rio de Janeiro that destroyed a lot of the 20 million items that were in its collection.
Yeah, it basically like collapsed the whole top of the museum, so everything that wasn't in the basement got destroyed.
Well, it's unclear too. There are some that were in metal boxes.
Oh, okay.
They might be okay.
They got to do more excavating first.
Mm-hmm. So in the collection, they had bones of the sauropod, Maxakalisaurus, they had ancient Egyptian artifacts, and they had Lusa, which is this 11,500-year-old human skull.
And that was the oldest one known, right? If not the oldest, one of the oldest.
Yeah, it was one of the oldest known. Luckily, no one was hurt because the fire happened after the museum closed on a Sunday. The museum's really old and got a lot of history itself. It was founded in 1818. There's a lot of criticism that this fire could have been prevented. So since 2014, the museum has not gotten its full annual funding. And in 2015, it had to close for a while because there wasn't enough funding to pay for the cleaning and security staff. And curators actually had to crowdfund to repair termite damage of the hall with their humpback whale and the dinosaur Maxakalisaurus. And then in May of this year, 10 of their 30 exhibits were closed because they were in disrepair. The museum had exposed electrical wiring and peeling walls. Yeah.
I can see where this is going.
Well, so when the fire broke out, there's 2 fire hydrants near the museum, but apparently they were empty.
Oh.
So the firefighters had to use water trucks and then get pond water from a nearby park.
Oh.
The government has said that they are going to study how to rebuild the museum, though researchers have mentioned that funding in Brazil for research keeps getting cut.
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper to pay people to upkeep a museum than build a whole new one.
Right. Plus, you've lost a lot of items in the collection now.
Yeah.
In the meantime, a group of people, including students, are trying to help rebuild by gathering images of the collections and exhibitions. So if you have any, send it their way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially for some of the ones that were lost, they weren't all described, but if you can get good pictures of them, they might be able to sort of piece together some of the measurements that they use for comparisons.
Mm-hmm. That's what we used to do with Spinosaurus.
Yeah. Well, that one was at least formally described.
True. This isn't the first time that a fire has destroyed a museum. There was, in April 2016, a fire in India's National Museum of Natural History in New Delhi that destroyed it. And then Instituto Butantan in Sao Paulo in 2010, they lost the world's largest collections of venomous animal specimens. For this particular fire, it's not clear how it started. It might have been from an electric short circuit or a homemade paper hot air balloon that may have landed on the roof. That's popular to do.
Like a lantern, basically.
Yeah. But unfortunately, there's a lot of irreplaceable items in the collection. There were many type specimens. There were indigenous objects. There were audio recordings of indigenous languages that are no longer spoken. It's not clear yet the full extent of the damage. As I said, there were some metal cabinets with fossils in them that may have survived. They found more than 40,000 mollusk specimens that had been reported to be saved. Everything in the main building, though, is thought to be destroyed, though the fish and reptile specimens, herbarium, and library were separate, so those might be okay. People were understandably very angry the day after the fire. There were actually police in riot gear trying to keep the crowd away from the entrance to the museum.
Yeah, well, I could really understand that, especially 8 years ago in Sao Paulo, a different museum burned down, and then they're letting this one like fall into disrepair. That's ridiculous. Come on. Yeah, it's such a bummer. And one of the saddest parts is some of these dinosaurs that were lost. There are lots of holotypes actually in there because as far as I know, especially with that Sao Paulo museum burning down, I think this was the largest natural history museum in Brazil. So if you needed a place where you wanted to store these specimens, especially you need a large space to display it or keep it in the collections, this is the place where you put it. So like Iritator, for example, which is that cool Spinosaurid with very little remains, because Spinosaurid remains are super hard to find. I believe that they had the skull down in the collection, so that's probably okay, which is good. But they hadn't described the postcranial remains, some limb elements that were, in the skeleton mount up in the museum. So when that got destroyed, we'll never be able to, 3D scan those or anything, unless somebody has already done it. Or you can piece it together from enough pictures from around it.
Right.
But yeah, there were a lot of other sauropods and other dinosaurs that may have been lost. And also, like Sabrina mentioned, some other really significant natural history specimens like Homo sapien and Smilodon and Mastodon, lots of animals that people are really interested in studying. It also struck to me we were talking recently about how, like the British Museum holds on to a lot of things that they've excavated from other countries. And they say, well, we'll give it back to you once you have a good enough museum to hold it in. And that always seems like kind of a cop-out, like we just want to keep it. But when stuff like this happens, you think, well, actually, maybe they have a point, because if the government isn't going to keep it in a real high-end, well-kept museum, stuff like this can happen and you can lose it forever.
Right. So, like I said, they are trying to collect as many photos as they can of photos of the exhibitions, photos of the collections, trying to piece as much as possible back together.
Yeah, so I'll have a link in our show notes if you want to send some pictures.
In happier museum news.
Good.
Yeah.
That was a downer.
The Museum of Prehistory in Brabant, Netherlands will be presented with a new Diplodocus skeleton on October 10th. About 70% of the skeleton's preserved, and that includes 300 bones that need to be cleaned and assembled. The process of doing that's going to take about 3 years, and if you visit, you can watch it happen. This Diplodocus is about 65 feet or 20 meters long, and it lived about 150 million years ago in what is now Wyoming.
Nice.
Yeah.
That is a lot, 70% of a sauropod. You don't get that often.
I know. It's a good week for sauropods.
Well, except for the ones that went missing
Well,
forever.
yes. Focusing on the positive.
Yeah, that's good.
In Ohio, the Cincinnati Museum Center is getting a 30-foot-long Torvosaurus skeleton in November. That one's 55% complete. It was found in Dinosaur, Colorado by a Cincinnati native, Jason Cooper, and it will be displayed alongside 5 other dinosaurs in Dinosaur Hall, including Allosaurus and Galeamopus, and 3 other new dinosaurs, though I couldn't find which ones they will be.
Cool.
Yeah.
Ohio has some good dinosaur museums with that in the Cleveland Museum.
Yeah, and you can go to some brewery sometimes and see dinosaurs.
Yeah.
It's great. Next, thanks to Dennis who shared this one with us. In Napa County in California, you can see a T-Rex skeleton nicknamed Roosevelt, also known as Rosie, at the Erin Martin Design showroom. At least it was up until the end of August. It might be up until the end of this month. I hope so. Maybe we'll get a chance to see it. But this T-Rex is 35 feet or 10.6 meters long. It took 3 to 4 people to assemble it in about a couple hours. And it's named after Franklin D. Roosevelt. And it's comprised of 3 partial skeletons found in Montana and Wyoming. 2 of the skeletons were found near Fort Peck Lake, a hydroelectric dam project that was made as part of FDR's New Deal in 1940. So that's why it got the nickname. Roosevelt the dinosaur is about 45% original bones.
Wow.
Yeah. It was put together in 2015. The skeletons were collected between 2008 and 2013 by Clayton Phipps. And it's on sale for $3.9 million.
Hope it goes to a museum.
That'd be nice.
Where do you have to go to see this?
The showroom in Napa County.
I wonder if we can go see it.
If
We
it's
should go.
still there. Yeah, we should try.
Yeah. Erin Martin Design Showroom.
Yeah, Dennis saw it and sent us pictures. Some good ones.
Nice.
Thanks again, Dennis. In another part of the world, Kaohsiung Industrial Park in Zigong, Sichuan, China makes animatronic dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures. Post Magazine wrote a feature on the park. There's 25 companies there, and apparently they make, quote, 4 out of every 5 models of prehistoric beasts around the world.
Holy cow.
This is according to the Sichuan Bureau of Commerce. Yeah. One factory, Gunggu Longtan, makes 2,000 dinosaurs per year, and they have 220 people who work there.
Holy crap.
They have dinosaurs in more than 60 countries.
That is a lot of people churning out dinosaurs.
I know. So making these animatronics, they require a lot of steps and skill, as you might imagine. It starts with cutting and welding a steel frame. Then they add motors and other electrical components. Then they cover it with synthetic foam. Then they carve that out to show the details. Then they glue silk gauze to the model and add 5 coats of silicone rubber, then an undercoat of pigment, then more silicone rubber, and then a top paint coat. And then they add the glass eyes and the wooden teeth and the claws that they make from fiberglass or silicone rubber. So lots of things. The industrial park, it's near a large fossil area. There's fossils from the Jurassic. They found that back in the 1970s by an oil prospecting team. And there's also a museum in the area, the Zigong Dinosaur Museum, Center of Jurassic Stratigraphy and Paleontology, which opened in 1987.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that's a good one.
Yeah, if you go there, you can see the excavation site. And species found there, they include the Stegosaur, Amargasaurus, and the sauropod Shunosaurus.
Oh, those are good ones.
Yeah.
Shunosaurus is one of my favorites. That's got that club tail, which is another weird thing you'd never expect to find on a sauropod.
Sauropods are great.
They're pretty cool. That's really interesting. It kind of explains why a lot of times I go to these animatronic dinosaur things and I feel like I've just seen the same one over and over and over again.
It's all made by the same people.
It is, apparently. And they all have that same like rubbery look. Although, I don't know, those don't look like they're silicone. Oh, I guess they are silicone rubber. But they're very rubbery looking, like their skin looks like it kind of jiggles over the armature underneath a lot of the time. And they might be outdoor safe too, given that I've seen a lot of these outdoors. Except for when they have an electrical short and then burst into flames.
Might not be them. We don't know.
That's true. Well, it seems 80% likelihood that it is if they make 4 out of 5 of them.
But they're not the only ones who make dinosaurs. There's actually a family in Great Falls, Montana that decided to build their own brontosaurus. So Justin Akins, who's the father, works for a Sinclair station, and then his 4 kids thought that it'd be fun to build their own dinosaur. And they found a dinosaur outline online. They traced it onto plywood and cut it out, and their cousins helped. The whole thing took them 2 years and a lot of welding. And they painted it. They had to actually paint it twice because they put too much paint on it the first time, and then I think it couldn't stand up or something happened. It was too slick, so they had to redo it. But now they plan on putting Christmas lights on it in December, and they're currently taking suggestions for names, and they're already planning their next project. They want to build a T-Rex.
That's cool. So they must have gone beyond just cutting out a plywood outline. That was, I guess, the first step in their design.
Yeah. It looks like metal in the picture.
That's cool.
There was welding, so it makes sense.
Oh, yeah. It just looks like it looks a lot like the Sinclair logo, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's got some depth to it. So, but it's still kind of a 2D shape.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
It's really cute. Next, it's already been 10 years since Google Chrome came out, and to celebrate, you can play a birthday edition of the running T-Rex game. You know, that one where the T-Rex use the space bar and it jumps over the cactus. So in this version, the T-Rex is wearing a party hat, and you still jump over cactus, but you can also collect birthday cake, and then there's balloons in the background.
It's always like when I see that thing, I get annoyed because it means my website didn't load. But seeing the little dinosaur, it does relieve a little bit of the sting.
Then it's doing its job.
Yeah.
And last, Mattel has a new blue Velociraptor dinosaur toy out. It's called the Alpha Training Blue. It's an interactive raptor. It is 16 inches, about 40 centimeters tall, and you can control it with a remote. It's actually a baby blue, so it's about the same size as baby blue in Jurassic World. Yeah. And the remote looks like Owen Grady's clicker, so you can act out those scenes. She comes in a cardboard box that looks like a dinosaur cage. She can make over 100 sounds and movements, including blink, roar, chomp, move her tail, and she has built-in wheels on her feet. There's 4 modes. There's training mode, guard mode, RC mode, or total control mode. In training mode, she responds to motion commands. You can give her treats or pet her, and then she can advance. And the press release said, quote, "You can train Blue up to 90% with 10% of her activity still a surprise, similar to a real animal."
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder how well that works.
The reviews so far have been positive.
How much does it cost?
Looks like $250.
Oof. I was going to say we should get it and try it out, but I don't know if I want $250 worth.
Maybe someone else can try it out and let us know if they think it's worth it.
Yeah. And before we get into our dinosaur of the day, we want to talk about another dinosaur sculptor who is our sponsor for today's episode, and that is TRX Dinosaurs, spelled TRX. It's not T-Rex, but TRX Dinosaurs. And they make puppets, sculptures, as well as animatronics. They are much more custom built than the ones that you get churned out of China for sure, because they make them all to order, so you can order any kind of dinosaur that you can imagine.
Yeah. Maybe you would want to order some dinosaurs that were lost in the Brazil fire.
If you really want to make it tricky for them.
Well, yeah. Give them some artistic license.
That's true.
But you could have your own Iritator or a Maxakalisaurus, or at least what we think Iritator looked like.
Yeah, and right now, by far the most popular one looks like it's the baby T-Rex, because they're posting more and more pictures of new baby T-Rex puppets on their Instagram all the time, along with videos of the work in progress, as well as how they kind of move around and things like that. So if you want to get your own puppet or animatronic or sculpture, then go to trxdinosaurs.com and put in exactly what you would like, and they can make it for you. And
also follow them on Instagram at TRX Dinosaurs to see all their works in progress. And now into the dinosaur of the day, Alectrosaurus, which was a request from Allosaurus, the great theropod dude, so thanks. It was a tyrannosaur that lived in the Cretaceous in what is now Inner Mongolia at the Irin-Dabasu Formation. There's only one species, Alectrosaurus olseni. The name means alone lizard. It was found in 1923 as part of the Third Asiatic Expedition of the American Museum of Natural History led by Walter W. Granger, and it was named in 1933 by Charles Gilmore. The species name is in honor of George Olson, an assistant paleontologist who discovered the fossils, which included a nearly complete right hind limb, part of the right femur, tibia, fibula, toes, hand, and part of the pubis. Olson also found a second specimen nearby, which included the humerus, fingers, and vertebrae.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Other fossils have been referred to Alectrosaurus that were found in China and Uzbekistan. It was a medium-sized bipedal carnivore that could grow up to 16.4 feet or 5 meters long, and it had a similar body shape to T-Rex.
I guess that's medium-sized, 16 feet long. But compared to something like T-Rex, that is still not too big.
It's still pretty small. But it was one of the top predators of its time, along with Gigantoraptor. Alectrosaurus probably preyed on ornithischians, such as Bactrosaurus and Gilmorosaurus. Guessing that one's named after.
Yeah.
The tibia and femur were similar in length. It was different from other tyrannosauroids, where the tibia is longer. Also, the hind foot and ankle were closer in size to the tibia than other tyrannosauroids. The hind foot is usually longer. Some scientists have thought that Electrosaurus olsoni was a species of Albertosaurus, but Thomas Carr in 2005 said that Electrosaurus had a number of distinguishing characteristics and therefore was its own genus.
And our fun fact of the day goes back to what I hinted at earlier about odon, because they said that odon was a common ending for other ornithopod dinosaurs. I wanted to check that because I didn't think I had seen odon very often. So I looked it up, and odon is in fact historically one of the most common dinosaur name endings. If you think about it, the original 3 dinosaurs were Megalosaurus, Hylaeosaurus, and Iguanodon, so it makes sense that that odon part from Iguanodon would show up in other dinosaurs. And there were dozens of them named in the 1800s. Most of them are now considered invalid, though. And in addition to Mattel, who named Iguanodon, the suffix was also used by Thomas Henry Huxley with Hypsilophodon, which is an ornithopod, Richard Owen, Othniel Charles Marsh, Edward Drinker Cope, Franz Nopska, Friedrich von Huene, and Joseph Leidy, who are pretty much all of the big names in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
And Leidy named Troodon, that was his odon, which is now considered dubious, but has that whole other lineage, but that is not an ornithopod, it's a whole other thing. But odon really isn't used very often for dinosaurs anymore, and I'm not sure, maybe that's because just having tooth is a little bit vague. It's kind of nice to hint at what family it's in, like Ceratops or something similar if you're going to end in a suffix, because otherwise it's just kind of vague, I suppose. But most of the time they just end in saurus, because that lets you know that it's a dinosaur. And then there are other fossils that were thought to be dinosaurs back in the day that ended in odon, but turned out to be something else. One of them is Squalodon, which is now known to be an extinct whale, but they thought was a relative to Iguanodon. Then there's Belodon, which is a phytosaur. It's sort of a Triassic crocodilian sort of thing. There's Anthodon, which was a Permian reptile whose name means flower tooth. That's kind of cool. And then one of the funnier ones is Succinodon, which was thought to be a jaw, but turned out to be fossilized wood with burrow holes in it from mollusks. So was not an animal at all, let alone a dinosaur. My favorite, though, is Volcanodon, which is an actual dinosaur. I think that's the coolest name for an odon.
It's a good one.
Yep. But odon just means tooth, so if there's an interesting tooth, sometimes they stick it on the end of all sorts of different animals, not just dinosaurs.
And that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes. And also, you have until our 200th episode, September 26th, to sign up, and we will give you an audiobook on our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/iknowdino. Thanks again, and until next time.
Thank you for listening to I Know Dino. If you have any questions or comments about dinosaurs, we'd like to hear from you at plesiosaur@iknowdino.com. And for more information on dinosaurs, go to iknowdino.com or follow us on Google, Facebook, Tumblr, or Twitter at I Know Dino.